enough to be going on with. Okay, so we're now moving to the South Library Te Kete Wānanga o Mōkihi earthquake repair options. So welcome. I know that councillors have had quite a lot of information on this already, including a very long slide presentation, and staff now do have, I'm told, a few slides to make sure that it's remind people here and also make it clear for the community as well. So I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you. Just how do we make the slides go? There we go. Councillors, we have had quite an extensive briefing on this, and we've also briefed the community board, and there's quite an extensive report here that I'll take it as read. There's a lot of information in there. First thing I want to do, though, is acknowledge some comments from some of the councillors about this basically coming as a shock to some of the community, and why didn't we tell them this was coming. And I'll take that one on the chin. We were preparing this technical report, so we knew which option to go to the community with, but we learn from these things. Just a quick recap. We've put up there the outline of the current building as it sits down at Beckenham there. Just a reminder that it was damaged in the earthquake and was assessed at the time at 10% of NBS, and with that extra temporary bracing is brought up to 34%, which is the minimum. As well as the structural issues with the building, there are issues with the sewer and the heating and ventilating system down there. And what we're asking today is not for additional funding, which we have highlighted in the report. Long term will be required, but it's to get a clear direction as to, do we go with a rebuild, which is our recommendation, rather than a repair, because of the extensive nature of the repairs. So with me today, I've got Lynn Armitage, who's the project manager, and Helen Trappett, our structural engineer from Lewis Bradford, and got a big contingent from libraries and facilities and legal here as well, if you've got questions. And I know we have, I think we have our QS
on the line,
online, and also someone from our PMOs. So we'll take it as read, and happy to answer any questions you may have.
That's great. Tim and then Aaron.
Just a couple of quick ones. When we say rebuild, we're talking about the same footprint or thereabouts, because it is on a hail site. Is that correct?
Absolutely, and that also means if we can use the same footprint, we can go over the top of the existing slab and avoid having to cart all that concrete away.
And just to clarify, the costings in the report are indicative, because once we've consulted with the community and the communities that use it, the different groups, and the staff as well, including David Sutherland and his crew at the cafe, which is a really important part of that building, we will be able to have a firmer or a better idea of the cost, which we would then take to either the 2023-24 annual plan or an adjustment to the long-term plan then. Is that correct?
That's correct. And what we hope to get from those workshops with staff, public, elected members, is a really clear indication of what they like about the building and what works well, and also what doesn't work well. There's a few things, a few funnies down there that don't quite gel. So that's the next step, and that's really going to help us define the future brief as to what we're looking at.
And final question is that, so following this decision, that is when we will be able, through the community board, myself and my colleague Mel, is to go and then ask the community and bring them in for what they see in the building.
That's correct.
Great, thank you very much.
Thanks. Aaron and then Mel.
Yeah, thank you for the report and all the various options and things. And this photo there helps with my question. Why did a building built in 2003 perform so badly? Because I look at that aerial shot and nearly everything around it survived all of those earthquakes, including some buildings that are 50, 80 years old or older, more than 100. and this one is needing a very expensive rebuild.
So with hindsight, it's easy to pick holes in people's designs. But if we look at it clinically with everything we've learnt in the last decade, the original design had a number of deficiencies. One would be the foundations. So the foundation system didn't perform well, and there's other buildings of the same vintage also close to a river that perform much better when they had specific detailing put in to accommodate liquefaction effects. So, speaking from personal experience, in the decade of the 2000s, we were aware of liquefaction as a thing that might happen, and we would get a geotechnical report and we would design foundations to accommodate that sort of movement. So the foundation has performed poorly. It's settled between 350 and 450 mils, approximately, with a 90 millimetre differential across the floor, which you can feel now walking around the building. So the second major deficiency is really the lateral system of the building, with it being portal frames that are very weak. And that's the limiting factor on the percent MBS rating when we look at the damaged building. It's a combination of earthquake damage, but also deficiencies of that original design.
I just follow up, did it meet standards at the time when it was built?
That's difficult for me to say now. We haven't done a forensic exercise to really assess every single thing. And what actually happened in the earthquake was you got a lot of benefit from secondary elements such as jib linings and the fit out that actually provided the stiffness to resist the earthquake loads. So I wouldn't be willing to put a number on, did it meet the code of the day? To give you a bit of an idea, the code today compared to the code in 2002 has gone up about 40%.
Yeah.
So if you designed a building right to the limit of the NZS 4203, it would now be deemed 60% MBS.
Okay,
So
good to know.
so it's difficult to put numbers on it, but you've got a combination of earthquake damage, but also deficiencies in the design.
And to pick up on a point that Councillor Kewen's made previously, we quite often design to minimum standards on things, especially with accessibility, and there's such a range of things that could have happened here, so it's an opportunity here to actually get it right and design as we should.
So then the question that would probably be going through a lot of people in the public's mind is there any comeback on the designers that designed a building that only lasted 5 years?
Unfortunately, it was a City Solutions structural design, so in-house City Council design, as I understand it.
Yeah, and there's been no forensic work done on it either at this stage.
Yeah.
Oh well, the cost will go back on them then, and then the other question is because a lot of people who go visit it say it seems fine, happy to use it. And I know you've explained some of the mechanics of the building around the eco and stuff need changing anyway. Why not just do that and sweat the asset for its longest feasible life when we're so restrained and prices are so high? Why would we not do that?
Answer that one.
Well, I guess it again might be a structural thing. I mean, you're asking someone to put their name on it to say this building's going to be okay.
Yeah. So the bracing that's been installed was definitely installed as a temporary measure. So there's still an earthquake-prone building notice on the front door. Lynn's got a copy of it there, which states that the building is only it's between 0 to 20% without the bracing, and then with the bracing installed, that's the red frames to the outside.
Yep.
It nudges it up to 34%. So I wouldn't be happy as a PCBU being responsible for that facility to say, well, actually, let's just leave it for another 10 years, making it closer to 20 years.
Just so you know, half our hospitals have those right through them next to every elevator and doorway.
That doesn't make it right.
Yeah.
No, doesn't make it right, but there's a limit to the
Yeah.
public purse. So, okay, thank
Yeah,
you.
it's not going to get any cheaper to fix. So there's another whole debate of why don't we go for a lesser degree of strengthening as a interim measure, or as a the problem is the structural part of the project's only a small part of the project. So if we look purely just at the structural part of it, there still needs to be quite a lot done to those steel frames to get them up to 50% or 67% of code, because they are only the 150 millimetre UC section, so that's an I section, it's only 150, so it's sort of half the size it needs to be.
And if you look at the slide up there, if you might remember from the presentation about, so basically that's what you're going to be left with. To correct the floor slab, all that stuff's going to have to come off anyway.
Right. Melanie, you had questions?
Yeah, I've got three. First one is, if we decide to do the rebuild, will that new building, well, it says it in here, but just to get it aired, it'll be at 100% MBS, it'll be fully insurable, and it would be far more sustainable than the current building?
That's
Absolutely, that's the big benefits of that option, having a clean slate to be able to importantly address any mechanical ventilation issues and architectural issues with insulation to all the different facades.
Second question, if the Alpine fault were to go, what do you think would happen to that building in that event?
Now, again, tricky question and a good question. So what I can tell you is that if you're sitting at 34% IL3 code today, if you're interested, that's equivalent to about 40-something% IL2, which is a lesser importance level, which can sometimes be argued for building like this. So you're sitting in that band of a grade C building, which is between 5 and 10 times the risk of an equivalent new building. So although we don't identify any immediate life safety hazards, it's still a factor more risky being in this building than an equivalent new building. And it's not a linear relationship, so it's quite a tricky thing to get your head around in terms of the risk. But my advice as a structural engineer is that it's not a good idea to have a facility that's got a childcare centre and many members of the public in it that's sitting on that threshold without planning to do something about it.
And lastly, would you, Lynn and Helen and the rest of the team, be prepared to give a public briefing, because that's what people have asked for, to give them the information that we've had and potentially to answer questions? I don't know, you can work that out how that would work, but would you be happy to do that?
Absolutely. Yep.
Great. Yanni, then Sam.
Yeah, thank you. So I just wanted to check if does it have any brittle collapse mechanisms in it?
So the highest risk items are the heavy items. So that's concrete panels internally, but also that south wall. The south wall is currently propped up, so that's okay. That's all good. And the internal walls, they also have other mechanisms helping them, such as the fit out, the lightweight walls. So we haven't put exact numbers on anything, but I'm comfortable enough that it doesn't have an immediate hazard as a brittle collapse. Yeah, it's
Because I'm just mindful, like in the past when we've looked at our policy, we've seen that the MBS is a fairly blunt mechanism for judging the risk, and so we've got wooden buildings, for example, that are well below MBS that are probably quite safe. It's just how it's calculated. So what would, just trying to understand, what would be the cost of bringing it further up to code or raising the MBS? I wasn't quite sure from the previous answer. So keeping it going as it is, given what we've heard with the stadium, obviously with the cost of construction at the moment. What are the options around how much we'd need to spend to get it to a level where you'd feel comfortable that it continued operation?
So that sort of assessment hasn't been done. It is something that we could look at. And I would estimate that it wouldn't be too onerous to put in additional bracing,
Right.
whether that be plywood braced walls or extra struts or extra ties up and above the ceiling level to mitigate further the risk of the heavier elements causing trouble.
But I think you just have to still bear in mind that that won't fix the slab that's got a
Absolutely.
Got
That's
gone
just
wonky. Yeah.
that's purely looking at life safety.
Yeah.
So that's not considering insurance or long-term resilience or
The usability
It's just-
of the building.
But we've had the insurance claim anyway, so we're not going to get
This is for
more
reinsuring.
insurance, I
though.
presume. We haven't fixed it, so if we have another event, would we be able to claim for this as well, given that we haven't fixed it?
No, you'd be self-insured.
Would any comment on that, Elizabeth? If we had another event?
If you have an event,
Sorry, you'll need to
If they-
come the microphones, people online.
Go on, hobble up here.
if you have an event, sorry, dodgy foot, in a building that has already been earthquake compromised, I mean, most of us will remember this from our own houses. If it's been earthquake compromised, there are carve-outs in the form of insurance that you can currently carry on that building. There could be, there'll be insurance carve-outs on it to date. There would be insurance carve-outs going forward. It's the same position that so many homeowners have found themselves in. It's not as easily and readily fully insurable as if you start again from scratch, because it is a compromised building. Is that?
Thanks.
Right. So effectively, if we temporarily propped it up,
Yeah.
I mean, all we, that's not going to change our insurance position one way or another. But at the moment, the rationale for rebuilding it is because we're worried about getting insurance cover on it. It's actually not. It's neither here nor there in terms of the case.
That's not the entire rationale. That's one of the points that we've raised.
No, that's what I mean.
It's
but-
one factor. So the insurance cover we've got now is the insurance cover we've got now, and
Right.
unless it was dependent on, and you must do something about this within X number of years, and I wouldn't know the position on that. But the insurance cover on a repair or a remediation would, I think, be likely to be less than that on a new build. So it's not the same. I think without having Adrian here or our insurer here, I don't imagine that it would be to the same extent, because you are insuring a building that was damaged and you're simply remediating a damaged building.
Right.
So that would be taken into account by the insurer
Okay.
when they're looking at exemptions and exclusions and so on within the insurance cover.
Yeah. And I was just wondering why we were bringing forward the funding in the draft annual plan, but not telling people that, but in the consultation document.
Well, I don't know whether Paul Dadson's online or not, but
Steve, are you online, Paul?
Like,
Yes, I am.
Yeah. I guess I was just trying to understand why we don't have one budget process that addresses the shortfall in funding and the timing, rather than what we're doing in this year's draft annual plan, which is to bring forward $4 million to do it sooner.
can you comment on that, Paul?
Well, at the moment, we've got only 200,000 sitting in FY23, and we had $8.5 million sitting in 24, which we've proposed to push out into 25.
Right. So the funding hasn't been brought forward.
It's been pushed out.
So I'm just reading from the CPMS sheet, and the changes that I'm looking at is that proposed annual plan 23-24, we're adding $4 million to that financial year, taking it from 24-25 and 25-26. So in this proposed annual plan, we are adding 4.1 0.2000 to the budget. But it's also recognising requires improvement funding above budgeted insurance amount, which is the rationale. But what I don't understand is why, given that we're going to consult on it next year, why it wouldn't just be done at the same time.
I'll butt in. You better correct me if I'm wrong, Paul, but the reason we've spread that funding out in the future is to reflect more accurately what the drawdown would be against a construction contract. So rather than leaving $8 million in 1 year, for example, and nothing in another year, that's not how a construction contract works. We've spread it out.
Oh, sorry. I'll just be really clear. I haven't been clear. It was currently spread out in our current LTP across 3 years. What we've effectively done in the proposed draft annual plan is to bring it forward and have a lump 8.4 in the 23-24 year.
Yep.
So it's a massive increase. And it's actually not spreading it out. It's actually bringing it forward as a lump.
So there's no extra funding. My understanding, Paul, there's no extra funding. It's just rephasing of it. Is that correct?
That's correct. And I mean, yes, that 8.4 in 24 at the moment is probably too high.
I'm just concerned because residents have come to us and made submissions around, wanting to understand what our changes are. And in our consultation document, we've called out projects that are less than this in the CD or the same quantum, but we haven't called this out. And so I just wonder how the community can have a say around how we're spending the money.
Well,
it's only about how we're phasing the budget. It's not about how we're spending the money.
Yeah, it's still, the project is still in the LTP. It's the same amount of money at the moment. It's just been rephased slightly differently. And over the last few weeks, there's been more rephasing done as a result of some of the decisions and guidance given by council. So it's not out of the ordinary to do that type.
All right, just 1.42. I just wanted to check. You say the recommended resolution is that staff advance the design of the repair or rebuild to concept and validate the cost estimate before returning to council in Q1 2023 for a decision to progress the project. So then when I read the resolutions, it says to direct staff to progress the design of a rebuild. So I'm just trying to understand why the repair option is not going to be progressed.
That's the whole point of this report, is that we don't want to waste time and money going down an option that's council don't support. That's why we've given you a number of scenarios here. The preferred option is a rebuild for the reasons we've detailed in the report. That will save time and money.
I understand the reasons. I guess what I don't understand is why we're not going to, when we look at 1.5 in terms of gauging views and preferences of affected and interested persons, consultation be understand and we'll take all suggestions put forward into consideration. So I guess what I'm trying to understand is, and I appreciate all the reasons why a rebuild makes more sense than a repair, but also why wouldn't we openly engage with our community around the different options like the repair, the rebuild, or the temporary structural propping, to give more life to the existing structure. Why would we be able to have that conversation through the next step of this process, or if not, why not?
Are you suggesting, councillor, that we go out and consult on options that aren't feasible?
It's absolutely feasible, isn't it? To temporary prop it for another few years.
It's a waste of money.
It will waste a lot of time and money doing so if it's not feasible, but council would also then need to decide whether they wish to sweat the asset longer and have it at a lower NBS rating and take on that risk.
Yeah. Cool.
Okay, can I just check on a couple of things? Firstly, if we waited until the next annual plan to consult on adding budget before we went into a consultation with the community over what the design would be, what would the delays to the project be?
Well, would getting it to the concept stage, you've got something that we've talked to the community about and a price at that point. There's nothing stopping you next year to say, right, we've got that, we've got some detail on this project now, could you put it in the drawer for another year? Or there's another number of options you can take February, March next year.
And have we had issues in the past where we've put a budget on and then gone to do some design work and then realised that actually what was wanted wouldn't fit in the budget? Sorry, you don't need to answer that.
No, I won't answer that one.
I was just going to say, I guess the point of starting on design, a concept design now, and engaging with the public on the basis that this is a replacement of the building.
Yeah, that's right.
Similar footprint, etc. So putting the constraints on lets us get a good feeling for whether or not we can meet all the requirements of the community and the stakeholders and the staff that use that building and what that cost would be. But if you don't set a budget, sometimes the sky can be the limit for the design.
Yeah,
if you know what I mean by that.
Absolutely. Yeah. So Lynn's got some comments on the budget stuff here. And then we're moving to Phil for a question.
I had a question about 15 minutes ago.
Yeah, so Phil's been up there for a really long time too. Sorry, but you're right, your name is above Phil's. There's just someone else.
So I'll keep this very brief. Councillor Johansson, I think we need to sit down and just compare the data you're referring to, because on the full annual plan on the website, the first expenditure is scheduled for 23-24 at 8.4 million. So I'm going to suggest that we do a bit of a cross-check on the data on how the project is currently phased and perhaps resolve that.
You're absolutely right. That is what is in our draft annual plan. Mm-hmm. The point I'm making, though, is that this is a change to our LTP that has not been signalled to the community in the consultation document. So people, like when they make deputations to us today, you know, around Shirley or Phillipstown or other things that they think are important, aren't aware that these are budget changes that we're making. And I mean, we've often been told that, well, you know, the budget change in the draft annual plan is only for this year, but the reality is that these across multiple years of funding is being impacted. So, but you're absolutely right. The proposed annual plan is 8.4. The council's proposal in the draft annual plan is to bring forward the $4 million into 23-24. What I'm concerned about is the public have not got visibility of that and may not have been able to make submissions to that because it wasn't called out.
Okay, so Sam, then Phil. Sorry, Phil.
Yeah, just one question. So we talked about, I mean, I'm quite relaxed about it being rebuilt as opposed to repairing it. I think that will save money longer term. Just if we go through the design phase and we put it in the drawer like you talked about, how long can we put it in the drawer for? So is it the kind of thing that we can, how long can you sit?
Council consents last for 2 years as far as I'm aware, so we could...
So probably take a year to get it, so that gives you maybe 3 years.
But also, I mean, the only thing that may significantly change is if the code changed again.
Yeah. Look,
that's what I'm getting to is if are we logically going to design it and then have it built in the next 2 or 3 years, or are we going to, so when we say we put it in the drawer, we're not going to design it and then push it to the end of the LTP, are we?
No. I mean, it was just it's something that has happened. I mean, we've had roading designs done, ready to go, and they have just to wait to funding. Sorry.
Can I comment on
You can comment.
So he's lost the plot.
I just heard nothing.
So the design stage that we're talking about, coming back to see elected members in the first part of 2023, is a concept design only. All right, so it's a concept such that we've had input from the community and the users, we've developed a concept, we've verified a cost for that. That's what you would be putting in the drawer, not a fully detailed, fully consented thing that was ready to build. Yeah. So through the next annual plan that we're talking about, 23-24, you would take that concept design and that estimate of cost and you would phase the money in the plan and you would consult on that through your annual plan /LTP
then
process.
And
design. Then you would do a detailed design and move towards construction when you knew you had approved funding available for that. Does that make sense?
That makes sense.
Okay.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay, Phil.
Yeah, so Sam more or less asked what I asked. Brenda's good. So just how long, I know we've sort of answered it, but how long for design, consent, consultation, how long on a good day with the tailwind would it be before you sat in front of us looking for the green button to say we need money and go? It'd have to be Have to be.
Yeah, $64 million question, Phil. Once we have the concept, council can then decide as to whether they support it or not, and also decide as to whether it's going to be addressed in the annual plan or the next LTP. And from that point onwards, then that's when we hit the go button. But really, that's a discussion for February, March next year when we come back.
Yeah, so February, March next year, come back with the concept plan.
Yes.
Yeah, and then it goes out for consultation, and then you've got to get consent as well. So you could easily be the next year, couldn't you?
On current time frames, I think it would take quite a bit of time to get it through the next few phases.
I'll just jump in, Councillor Major. So if we can go through the annual plan process, there'll be a lot of things, obviously, that really start to move reasonably rapidly. So resource consent, building consent, the finalisation of the design, etc., and of course going to market for a contractor. So there's a lot of stuff that would need to run in parallel. And the earliest, according to my estimate at this time, that you could get for a construction start would be in the calendar year of 24.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Okay. No, that's fantastic. That's and just to clarify in my head, at the moment we're just sneaking through with yes. Is that, have I got that right?
I didn't hear that.
Just sneaking through what? Sorry.
NBS.
With earthquakes.
Yeah. So the current rating is 34%. MBS at an importance level 3 with the temporary bracing in place. And if we were to, for argument's sake, consider the building an importance level 2 building, which is a normal building, it would be around 40-something%. So you're in that range of C-grade building.
Okay. Yeah. And one last question. If we're going to all the trouble of a concept design and that sort of thing, and I know the areas aren't the same size or shape, and listening to Joe Gould this morning, is it possible that this exactly the same plan could be used at Shirley Road, which would save a lot of design? Then when it all comes to us, it's all, the two of them are sitting in front of us and we just pick which one we do, or probably both with a bit of luck if we're lucky.
That's really a question for the libraries team, but there's always learnings from every project that can help us with the next one.
And I think the key to this is you've got two different communities there. We'll be going to the community to talk about what they like and what they don't like about this one. That may be a wee bit different for the Shirley community. They might want some changes which suit their needs. So I guess potentially yes, but it would require discussion with the community first.
All I'm getting at is to build the same plan. If you can do it, then do two separate designs. That's all I'm saying.
Yep. Understand. Yep. We could certainly take the design to them, but I mean, there's a lot of things to happen in the Shirley area and the discussions with 10 Shirley Road and that yet.
Thanks, Brent.
Okay, are there any further questions? If not, I think I have a mover and a seconder, Tim and Mel, for some resolutions that you've sent through. Yep. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay, so these are similar but a bit more detailed to the initial staff recommendations. Staff have had a chance to look through these.
Yes,
do you have
happy
any
with those, yes.
Happy with those, no concerns? No. Right, so you can speak last? Yeah, okay. So Councillor Scavendra, it's moved, Councillor Coker seconded. Is there any debate? Yanni?
Sorry, can I just Ed, can we get advice back on temporary strengthening to extend the life?
Point, temporary strengthening, is that because you would like that as a different option?
Yeah, well, both, because if it's going to we don't know what the budget outcome is going to be in a year's time, so we might decide to do that anyway because of the concerns that have been raised. Or we might find that that's something that the community wants. So it would be good to know that when we talk to the community. That's certainly the feedback I've had from people is they have asked, if what's wrong with the current building, if it could be extended, because they love the building. It's a great place.
We've got 157 pages explaining it, and we've said we could go and talk to the community.
So, Yanni, are you looking at moving an amendment to bring some extra information?
Well, an additional resolution, yes.
So that would be an amendment, unless councillors Scandrett and Coker. No. So you'd have to move an amendment and have a seconder.
All right.
But there is no reason why during the process if staff thought that was going to be useful, they couldn't just do it. But
Okay, well, if they can just do it, that's fine. I'm happy for the staff just to do it.
This could be asked through the
a
consultation.
resolution, but I mean they may not. They might, because we're going to give direction to do a rebuild.
We're going to,
in the meantime.
in the resolutions, it requests staff to hold a public briefing which is live streamed about the repair and build options to inform the affected community. So I would have thought that information would be really relevant for that.
I don't. Okay, so question for staff.
Sure.
In time for a community briefing, would you be able to gather some information? I mean, we've already had information through on the NBS and the structural stuff there. Would you be able to have information at that briefing on what it would mean just to do extra strengthening?
We haven't set a date for the briefing yet, have we?
Sure.
It's because we are wanting a briefing quite quickly for the community. That's the whole point.
Yeah, it's quite a tricky thing because it depends what, Yanni, it depends what you're after. If you're after, let's look at a scheme for argument's sake to take it up to 2/3 full code, and you want that to stay in place for 10 years,
Then-
I'd need to know sort of what's the time frame. Are you happy keeping the red braces outside as well? Yeah. And is this a interim measure of, are we then going to have the same debate in a decade's time?
I would say, I mean, my suggestion would be 5 years, but
Okay, so
At what NBS level?
well, what gives you the comfort? I mean, there's not a life for us, so it's not shut. If it was dangerous, it would be shut right now. We wouldn't let people in
okay,
it.
Yanni, I'm just going to draw a close to this particular conversation, because your
So I was just going to leave it to
potential
staff, as
amendment-
basically.
That's it, because your potential amendment and the information and what you're aiming to do would be quite different to directing staff to start a rebuild process. Then I think you should have that as a foreshadowed motion rather than an amendment.
I'm sure in the workshops with our citizens that we're going to get those questions. So we'll have to answer them in the workshops anyway.
And I'm happy for staff to determine what the right level of MBS would be for, say 5 years. I just give a time frame of 5 years. But I'm just mindful of what's happening with the stadium.
You can't say that.
Thing is-
You can't just.
Hang on, Tim. The point of this report is to give staff direction on whether to proceed with a rebuild option or whether to do a repair, which would likely entail some extra strengthening and things like that. If you would like another option, Yanni, which is to just strengthen the building to make it last as long as possible before we look at those other options, then that will have to be a foreshadowed motion rather than
I'll foreshadow that. Yep.
Okay, thanks. Pauline.
A question about the wording in the resolution. Tim, you've moved it, haven't you?
Yeah.
So 2 seems to contradict 1 in my view. So I think 2 is asking to inform the public about this report. So it's not asking them whether we go for a repair or rebuild. It's you're wanting to workshop the report and explain to them why we are voting for 1.
Yeah.
So can you change that wording? Because it looks like you're having a briefing about repair and repair options. So it's really request you hold a briefing which is live streamed about
Considered
this
in
report.
this report.
Yeah.
It could say about the repair and rebuild options considered in this report to inform the affected community.
Okay.
Contained in this report.
Yep.
So it's just an request
About the repair and build options discussed in this report in order to inform. Yeah. Otherwise it looks like you're going out to ask them whether to repair it.
Happy with that?
Okay, and Jan, the foreshadowed motion on bringing information to enable a strengthening and deferment of the repair. Further, we would
Yeah, I can't hear you. Is that right? Is it me?
Sorry, someone turned that off. Yeah, have you got a question?
Yeah, we've got to rebuild it. We're just throwing good money after bad. Like
Phil, is this debate or question?
It's a debate.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, it's not
we'll start debate
Get
in
in
just a
line.
second. We just had some more clarifications. So,
sorry. I thought we'd.
Yeah, we're about to start the debate. Sorry, some other people had some extra questions.
Sorry.
That's all good, but your name's on the list. Okay, so we are got the debate. Tim wants to wind up at the end, so we've got. I've got a question. Okay, another question. Yep.
And it relates to treating Yanni's point as a foreshadowed further motion, because given that we have heard in answer to a previous question that once this work has been done, we could then ask, or the future council could ask for that to be put in a bottom drawer for some time. The answer to the question that Yanni's asking, or the information he's asking for, could actually inform whether that was viable or desirable and how long for. So I would suggest that Yanni's addition could be dealt with by way of amendment rather than foreshadowed motion, because it's additional to, not instead of, and actually could inform a decision that a future council might want to make once this information and associated costs land.
Okay, the mover and seconder are not happy having it included.
Yeah, but the question of whether there's an amendment on it, whether it's treated as an amendment or not, has got nothing to do with whether the...
Johansson has indicated that there would be instead of doing this work.
I wanted it as part of the
as
options
well as,
that comes
my
back
understanding.
to us. As an option. But you don't want it there, so...
So
Yeah, the next council will be getting briefings and updates and have a paper come to it on the concept design, and during that process may wish to ask for additional information.
So my understanding is you maybe wish to add a note that when we come back with the concept design and costings in Q1 2023, that we bring the information that Councillor Johansson was asking about as a comparator, so that you can make a decision to go forward.
I mean, I'd assume that kind of information would be in an options kind of report anyway, right?
We usually do, yes. We have to consider all options. So when we come back, we can have that as a comparator to say, here's the concept plan, here's the new costings on it, and by the way,
to go ahead because
of this, and if you don't wish to go ahead, we could sweat this for another 5 years, but these are the cost implications and the risk involved.
Yep.
So it is as well as, not instead of.
So it could be.
Thank you.
So unless you want to put it as a note or change.
Is it genuinely, Tim, no, but it's generally understood by staff that that would come back in the options.
Yes,
Yeah.
I'm happy with that. I'll just put it up there as a note to say that to include that information.
Yeah. So a noting provision.
That way, there'll be an action memo that will come from that, and staff will have to
But it's not
include
a
it.
resolution.
That's what I'd do.
No. So process-wise, are we able to just have a note in the committee discussion kind of part that is not a resolution? Is that right? Okay. Are there any further questions before we move to debate? Yanni.
Ask that you put them, just put one separately. Thank you. 1A and 1B as well.
Okay. Okay, we'll move to debate then. Melanie. And then, no, you had a question. Melanie, then Phil.
People love South Library, and I think that's why we've heard a lot of feedback from the community over a short period of time, especially on social media. They want a local library, and they want their service centre. And it's not just local people that use it. We heard from Joanna earlier that she goes there sometimes, and she lives in Shirley, so or at least is in somewhere around there. So I think part of this process, so I think we'd probably agree that we should have informed the community before today. I think the process happened incredibly quickly from our initial briefing to making a decision. And I think putting that information forward to people to see why we're making the decision today that we are is a sensible one to make. It seems very, very clear to me. As we heard today from Helen, structural engineer, if we keep it at 34%, that's 5 to 10 times the risk to people's lives if there's some unfortunate incident like an alpine fault. Earthquake. So I'm personally not willing to risk that if we can move forward. I also would like to see that new build be at 100% NBS, and also for the new build to also be far more sustainable. There's many elements, and the staff can probably say this much better, of the current building that we have that don't work, and so it'd be good to make it fully operational when we have a new library and service centre. And where the discussions around funding, well, we're not at any point at the moment making any decisions actually around that, because it's going to come to annual plan or to future long-term plans. So that final budget will happen later. So at the moment, we're just looking at the concept design, and we're going to involve the public in that, so they can have their say in what the future of this new building looks like. So I think it's when we have the resolutions that we have today to make sure that people's voices are heard for a library that they love.
Thank you. Phil.
Yeah, well said, Mel. I agree with everything there. It was, way back in the day, it was designed with all the best intentions, and it was prior to the earthquake. Now we find that it's sunk to 300 to 400 millimetres, which is no surprise to me because it's so close to the river, and it's got a 90 millimetre slope on it. We're just throwing good money after bad. Even if we could repair it, from what I read, it's going to cost every bit as much, if not more, than repairing it, than rebuilding it. Sorry. So I'm totally in support of this to get a design for a rebuild underway as soon as we can. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Yanni?
Thank you. Look, I understand that, there's some constraints, and I really am concerned, though, that, the transparency with our community over this process is really frustrating, because I think, what we learnt through the earthquake as we looked at our facilities is that just using an MBS as a standard to guide decision making doesn't always give you the best community outcome. In fact, there's so many nuances to how we assess things and how they're used that is important. I don't even really comprehend why this is an IL3 building, and I wonder what other facilities we've assessed as IL3 versus IL2 that are in a similar category. But the reality is that, first and foremost, this council has an issue with residents feeling like they can be engaged in our decision making and around transparency. And so I would have thought the best thing we could do is to put all the information on the table at an early stage of this process and enable the community to feed into the various options that are being put forward, rather than us make a decision today that jumps to a conclusion based on a report that we've received for a few weeks, based on a draft annual plan that has got budget movements that, again, we've heard today may not even actually be necessary. And probably most concerning is that in our current financial climate, with the cost of construction, and I don't think you need me right like today to point out what's happened this morning to all of you, that we're in a very serious situation with the cost of doing things, that we're looking at a massive quantum of money being necessary for a community facility that is relatively new in the context of things, and that there may be other options to extend its life. So I don't agree with directing staff to engage the process for a rebuild, to progress the design for a rebuild of South Library facility at this stage. I think the process is around the wrong way. I think this needs to happen after all the options are consulted on with the community to show what the cost is, and that should be done as part of the draft annual plan or the draft LTP. But I just implore councillors to be open-minded as to the best outcomes in the situation that we're in, so that people can actually feel like they've been involved and can have a say rather than leap to a conclusion. If the building was dangerous and if there was such a risk, then it would be closed. But it's not. It's open. People love it. It's a great facility and a lot of people really enjoy it. So I think, again, that's the sort of information that I think working through with the community would be important. So I'm happy to support some of the other things that are in here, but just under one, I won't be supporting that today. I'll be abstaining from that one because I don't believe the process is right.
Thank you. Pauline, then Sam.
Yeah, thank you. Look, this is a technical report that we've received, and it gives me enough information to actually agree with the report that a rebuild for this facility is the way to go. And the sooner that we do that, as we know in this climate, the better. If we were to delay one, we would delay the whole thing by at least a year. And we've had that information, and you requested that, Yanni, and you've got that. And for anyone to interpret this report negatively, I'm gobsmacked. I think this community is incredibly lucky. They're lucky that they managed to have the facility propped up for how many years, 10 or something. And now they're lucky that they've got a technical report that says this is the best way to go. Let's deal with this. There's other issues apart from safety. There's ageing infrastructure inside and all that, which will be dealt with, including cheaper operational after it's rebuilt. So, I think this is a positive report. We should be celebrating it and get on with it. So I encourage you to vote for one. Don't abstain and vote for it and get this thing happening. Community facilities are incredibly important. We know that. And we know how much people love this facility. So let's get it fixed. Let's get it working properly.
Thanks, Sam.
Yeah, just really briefly. I think Brent and the team have done a pretty good job here of getting this to a sensible solution. If you think about it, most of the time repairs far exceed the cost of rebuilding. But I think what the team have talked about today, which is really useful, particularly an independent engineer, is that, if we were to sweep this for another 10 years as the PCBU, that's possibly not the most prudent thing to do as a council. I note that we're all exempt from that as the PCBU, but our chief executive, Dawn, is the one that does end up in prison should something go wrong, and we haven't taken the necessary steps. But I think probably the thing that's been lost a wee bit in the debate is around what the team have said around developing the concept design. So what's going to happen, and just to be very clear for any public watching this, is they will now go away, develop a concept design with the community, taking into account Mel's amendments, work through that and come back to us. If at that point we decide we do not have any money on budget, and like everyone's alluded to, we have some challenges around our budgets today, we don't need to proceed with it straight away. So we're not hitting a go button on something that will end up in a drawer and won't be used. We're developing a concept with the community, at which point we decide to hit the detailed design phase will then allow us to go and work with them. So, yeah, to me, this is a really pragmatic solution, and I think it's the kind of thinking we need within the council to develop stuff to a point which we can line up with our budgets, but also acknowledging that, and we've seen it before more times than not, when we repair something as opposed to replacing it, we end up costing the ratepayers far more than we need to. So I'm fully supportive of what the team have put forward.
Thank you. Andrew.
Thank you. Building a new fit-for-purpose 100% of MBS building, after the community have been using a damaged building at 34% MBS propped up with those temporary structures for the last 11 years, in my view, is absolutely the right thing to do. And the report makes it clear why. And the answers to the questions that have been asked this morning make it even clearer. But I think it's important to realise that this is just one decision on the way to an outcome for this building. It's not the final decision, particularly given the decision that's going to be needed in the future to approve the required quantum of funding and the timing of that expenditure as well. But what we've got in front of us today is an opportunity to progress this project towards the right outcome. Now, just because a building isn't so dangerous that it needs to be closed isn't a reason to wait until it is so dangerous it needs to be closed before we do something about it. Just because a building is one that people love isn't a reason to leave it there. And there were plenty of buildings that people loved that had to be demolished after the earthquakes. So the concept of a damaged building needing to be demolished, regardless of how much people love it, is hardly a new thing in Christchurch. Thanks to Tim and Melanie for the resolution, including the additional wording that acknowledges the need to inform and further engage the community. My view on this today, it's an opportunity to get some progress rather than causing further delay. It's an opportunity to be decisive rather than indecisive, and it's just one step on what's going to be a far longer journey to the completion of this project, with some far bigger decisions around quantum and timing of funding still to be made by a future council.
Aaron?
Yeah, no surprises here. I agree with quite a few of Yanni's points around this, although I do like number 2 that's been put in there. As soon as Melanie suggested it, I agreed under my breath straight away, said that's a good idea, because they need to be taken on the journey. I struggle with us, because this is a public building, built with public money, and I just believe that this council for too long now has not sweated its assets enough. Some people would say we do, and we do too often. That has, I disagree. I've spent plenty of time in this building after the earthquakes. We were in there for 6 months. It was our main building. We were there 4 days a week, and it's a great facility. I was never at any point in any time that I've been there since ever thought that there was that bigger problems with this building. And like Yanni said, if it was that dangerous, it would be closed, and so would many others. But not every building will always be 100% of code, and not all are. And that will bring me to my point that whilst we live in a city that has many facilities that people spend 24 hours a day in, and I'll allude to things like mental health facilities and stuff, which are just so far beyond the standard that this building currently is, I think it's irresponsible to spend this sort of money on a building when we could at least have the option of seeing if we could sweat the asset. And I'd only want to do that if it was done safely. I don't want a life risk, but if it can be done safely, then I believe we should, and that should be the way forward. Because to be quite honest, this council's hemorrhaging money, and we had a really clear warning yesterday in our briefing, and I won't give out any of the details, but we had a clear warning that the more that governments and councils commit to spending, the more prices keep going up. The private sector started pulling back. Councils and governments have to do the same, because when you're all bidding on the same piece of steel and the same cubic metre of concrete, the price can only go one way. And so I believe it's irresponsible to launch into this now without at least having the option for the public of sweating the asset a little. Not making it uncomfortable for staff, and if there's a bit of fall from one side of the building to the other, welcome to a percentage of people's houses in the city. So let's just start to try and get a little more value out of something that, if it, as far as its life goes, has had somewhere between a fifth and an eighth of its expected life. It should have been there a lot longer than this, and there's a big carbon footprint to making a whole new building when we could get a lot more value out of this.
Unlike my colleague, I am really not keen for us to sweat this asset much longer. I think that while it's well and good taking your own risks of things that you choose in your own home with your own family, we have quite a different role as governors, where we're governors for public space and public realm, and that's quite a different one. And I think that comparing South Library to the terrible state of our mental health facilities just brings the two wrongs don't make a right phase to mind, and it beggars belief actually that the CDHB have allowed that asset to be sweated for so long.
It's government.
Yeah.
It's government. We've asked many times.
Yeah.
Just let's not mislead the public if we
Could you
can help
please
it.
not interrupt the debate? It is not just the MBS that we're dealing with today. It is a range of factors, and one of them is sustainability. I found myself agreeing with both the Deputy Mayor and Councillor McDonald at the same time, which is unusual, but heartening.
Tell me about it.
But the one thing I think that hasn't been mentioned in this is something that gets raised a lot when it comes to our buildings, and people often talk. Colleagues bring up the most sustainable building as one that already exists. That's not the case in this case, and this is the first time that we've had a full sustainability assessment done with the option of repair or rebuild for one of our council facilities. I wish we'd been able to do it much earlier for other facilities. I think that would have helped us enormously through this process. And I think that while the techniques and things, the tools weren't there's some lost opportunities in that space. So it was really good to see that done. It's really clear that both for a environmental sustainability, financial sustainability, and for public safety, that this is the right way to go. And now I'll turn to Tim to wrap up the debate.
Thank you very much. But not all surprises are bad, and it was a bit of a surprise when it came to us at the community board in such short notice. But as I said, not all surprises are bad, and it's a real shame that people think that this is. What it has actually highlighted is the community are now really focused on this. So when it goes out to the community through the community board, we will have higher engagement. So that's a real plus. We've already talked to staff. The community board and staff have agreed to have information at the entrance to the library and service centre. So that's going to be a real plus. They've agreed to live stream the briefing to the community board, and the community can come to that as well. So this has raised the feedback, etc., from the council, from the public, and it's all been positive. There is a concern about the loss of services during the fix, but I think it is better to have that planned in a temporary situation in the local area than turning up one day and having to close a building that is 34%, irrelevant whether it is IL3 or IL2, that's just pieces of paper. It is, if the building falls under 34%, we have to close it, and there is nothing there for that community. And when I say community, the community stretches from Sumner through to Hallsville, and we've heard earlier on, as far north as Shirley. It's a wide community. IL3, this is a building that was built to be a secondary to the council building in time of emergency and crisis. And over the last 10 years, we have had our share. We have had, I won't go into it, but it's right across the board. We've had everything. And we actually don't know when the next earthquake will happen, but we do know now that there will be one. We do not know when the Alpine Fault's going to happen, but we are told, we're given distances and times, etc., which mean nothing, because it could happen tomorrow, could happen in 500 years, but it will happen. So we need this venue as a secondary, a backup, and especially for the communities that use it. And when you go there and talk about communities, we talk about concept design and talking with these communities, there are a wide range of people that have nowhere else to go and sit on the computer to have an engagement of some sort, cut down their isolation from communities. We have the childhood learning centres, absolutely outstanding, where we have young people teaching old people how to use computers and other things. It's absolutely wonderful to see. And with consultation through the community board, with the community would know the groups. We know the residents' associations. We know the Apawaho Heathcote River Network. We know the Summit Road Society. We know the members of that and those that are important there. There are so many areas that this local community board and the local councillors who represent this area and these areas can help with when staff are making that connection. I just see positives here, and it's a real shame to see negatives, and it may be put in a drawer for some time, but at least with consultation with the community, we know what we're building, we know what is wanted by our community, we know a ballpark figure, a better ballpark figure of the costs that we'll be looking, and whether this is future annual plan or an adjustment to a long-term plan, that is to be decided in future. I want to thank the councillors that have been supportive, and it's really good to hear, and it's all about community. It's not about anything else. Thank you.
Deputy Mayor Turner? Yes. Councillor Chu?
Yes.
Councillor Coker?
Yes.
Councillor Cotter?
Yes.
Councillor Donovan?
Yes.
Councillor Davidson?
Yes.
Councillor Galloway?
Yes.
Councillor Johansson, I understand you're abstaining.
Yeah, so just wanted to support 1A and 1B, but abstain from 1. And I did ask that those could be broken out separately.
Oh, so sorry.
One is A and B are part of one.
Yeah.
Which is quite different. You don't want to do it? Okay, I'll just abstain from all of it. But I support A and B. I just don't support number 1.
Okay.
Yeah, but the other two are about the design, so.
I'll just abstain. I'll just abstain from
Abstain
that
from one, okay.
Councillor Kewen. Councillor McDonald.
Yes.
Councillor Major.
Yes.
Councillor McClellan.
Aye.
Councillor Scandrett.
Yes.
Councillor Templeton.
Aye.
Okay, so that is 12 yeses, 1 no and 1 abstention. So that is carried.
Thank you. Do we need a division for the rest of it? No. Okay, can I put the rest of them, so 2 through 5. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Any against? No, I declare that carried. Thank you very much. Okay, I'm aware that 1 o'clock is rapidly approaching. Thank you so much.